Thank you very much, Stephen. And sort of looking around at this room, I was sort of reminded of quite how much substance there is to the financial services sector in the bailiwick, in a time when many people are focusing upon whether there's substance or nameplates. I think this room is some of the most convincing evidence we could offer to the outside world that indeed the IFC in Guernsey is an IFC which is based on substance and thus far better placed for the future than some other places which are perhaps not based on having so much substance in our own island. What are we doing today? We're going to talk about productivity and prosperity. After a little more than 2 years of fairly radical reform at the Commission, designed to control our cost base and make us more effective and competitive, we thought it might be helpful to use some of our time at this event to reflect upon what it takes to keep Guernsey competitive as a domicile for high-value work in an increasingly competitive global market. My colleagues tomorrow will provide updates on specific sectors, the progress made, and the challenges which remain for Guernsey, with our focus today being on an overview of what we think, as a bailiwick, we need to consider if we are to preserve and to enhance our international competitiveness. We're also conscious that this is an opportune time for reflection on how we, together, keep Guernsey competitive. 5 months ahead of the next elections to the States, with many of our current and prospective States members carefully reflecting on what policy priorities they should put to their electorates and their manifestos. Lest any of you think this is a strange subject for a financial service regulator to adopt, as opposed to, say, focusing at length on the weaknesses in controls and outsourcing, an important issue on which the Director of Enforcement will touch this afternoon. The fact is that we regulate the main wealth-creating sector of Guernsey's economy. Under our approach to risk-based supervision, we spend a large amount of time analysing the competitiveness of the business models of key firms in different sectors, and we have a strong interest in the success of the sector. Furthermore, via the Commerce and Employment Department's 21st Century Regulator Policy Letter, which is due to be debated shortly, the States may wish us to have new objectives, which include actions to maintain and support the efficiency, competitiveness and transparency of financial markets located in the bailiwick, to reduce and support the reduction of prudential risk in the financial services sector and the maintenance of financial stability in the bailiwick, whilst having regard to the economic importance of financial services to the Guernsey economy and the need for its status as a competitive, high-quality international financial centre to be preserved. And finally, at this time, I think it's very appropriate that we're focusing on productivity and prosperity, because if we have prosperity and high productivity, then you have a society in which people can feel part of society and earn their way within that society. Over the Channel, and indeed in the Middle East, we see countries which have not focused on prosperity and productivity, and as a result they have an alienated generation of youth who choose to subscribe to rather wild ideologies rather than working within the system. So at the backdrop, while it's very, very far removed from Guernsey, we need to make sure that we do this because you want everybody to have a chance to earn their way in society, to play by the rules and to get on. When people get desperate and they feel they haven't got any stakes in society, they do desperate things, such as we saw in Paris and Kenya recently. So it's just, it is a sort of backdrop, and I think perhaps an impetus for us all to reflect on how important it is that we serve not just Guernsey's prosperity, but that we work as we do to enhance global prosperity, because there's an awful lot of young, unemployed people there who, if we can make the investments go right, if we can make the banking go right, then there can be the economic growth which can give those people hope that by working within the system, they can build productive and worthwhile lives. But turning away from the recent sad events in Paris, why should we reflect at this time? Well, new technologies have reduced barriers to trade and commerce across the world. The internet, online universities, TED, and the ubiquitous webinars have also lowered the barriers to technology transfer between nations. At the same time, a large number of economically literate countries with highly developed engineering skills has sought to develop to achieve or to surpass the living standards which those in Western Europe and North America have been accustomed. This degree of interactivity, together with the level of international competition which exists now that so many countries are no longer shackled by 19th century Marxist dogma, means that any Western nation, especially the smaller ones, which cannot fall back upon a large and semi-captive domestic market, have to work harder to earn their crusts of bread. In Guernsey, we have had more than 3 decades of plenty. Whilst the 2008 crash marked a blip in the fortunes of the island, it did not cause the economic chaos which afflicted many other developed countries. We cannot, however, think that the fact that we are Guernsey allows us to carry on in being amongst the top 10 jurisdictions of the world in terms of GDP per capita. Rather, we need to collectively consider what we have that is good and what we have which is not so good, and work, as only small countries can, to ensure that we live a competitive economy in which our children, or in some cases, grandchildren, can work. As the World Economic Forum puts it, a country's competitiveness is widely accepted as the key driver for sustaining prosperity, raising the well-being of its citizens. Enhancing competitiveness is a long-term process that requires improvement across many areas, as well as a long-lasting commitment from relevant stakeholders to mobilize resources, time, and effort. The World Economic Forum's well-established analysis of country competitiveness is based upon 12 pillars, which I'm sure you're delighted to learn. I'm not going to read to you. They are very proper and will appear in due course in detail in the printed version of this speech. I'd rather be practical. We can perhaps learn something by looking at the factors which make the WEF's 2 most competitive countries competitive. These are Switzerland and Singapore, countries with whom, I'm happy to say, Guernsey has a lot in common. If we turn to Switzerland first, the WEF highlights the following features of Switzerland as being key to its ongoing track record of delivering a very high standard of living to its citizens. Firstly, it has effective and transparent public institutions with a political system which ensures cohesive and inclusive leadership across political boundaries, which enables the country to implement a very long-term economic agenda. Secondly, there's a strong culture among stakeholders in government, business and civil society of working together. Then the population vote on major decisions directly. It's got an independent judiciary and a long tradition of the rule of law. It also successfully implemented a debt brake a decade ago, which helped create a stable macroeconomic environment. It has a top-notch labour market that is both flexible and efficient, and it has an educational system which is outstanding in producing a highly skilled labour force that continues to receive important on-the-job training. It has also, of course, got an excellent innovation ecosystem. Turning to Singapore, the WEF observes that its key features are the world's most efficient goods market and labour market, one of the world's best institutional frameworks, and a strong focus on education. It's worth pausing here Although, conversely, we do have a collection of states members often elected with different and occasionally contradictory manifesto commitments. In one sense, we are quite far away from the Singaporean model of having one democratically elected ruling party for the last 50 years. But in another sense, we are quite close in practice, in that we tend to have estates comprised of individuals who collectively think of themselves as representing Guernsey rather than narrow sectional interests. Our system is therefore a vast improvement on that in many countries, and one which offers both continuity and stability. This in turn feeds into whether we have effective public institutions pursuing long-term policy. We are certainly not beyond reproach, and we should always strive for improvements. But aside from some minor disagreements about road layouts in the capital earlier this year, there is a good deal of long-term economic policy which moves within relatively modest parameters from states to states, thereby providing some reassurance to the business community and investors in terms of our long-term stability. Parts of our intangible infrastructure are good. Guernsey has a culture where the rule of law, based on our highly respected Anglo-Norman legal tradition, is well embedded, attracting many foreign investors who wish to make sure that they put their money somewhere which is a safe long-term destination. Here we must not be complacent, as perpetual upgrading is required. Hence the Commission-led revision of laws project this year and further work on replacing the NRFSB legislation, which is necessary and something which we hope to take forwards next year in conjunction with you and the states. We also need to be careful that costs are contained so that those providing legal services are cost competitive with other comparable jurisdictions. Whilst I very much doubt we have a savings rate similar to the nearly 50% of GDP which Singapore records, we certainly have a savings culture, with banks indicating that Guernsey men and women dislike debt and pay down their mortgages far faster than their brethren in the UK. We also have a tightly managed but open immigration policy. This is always going to be a tricky issue, and it's certainly one on which the current state has done a lot of work. We do appear to have a successful track record, however, of running a relatively open immigration system, which has served the interests of the indigenous population quite well. We have avoided the extremes of the political spectrum and have sought a cautious middle ground, open to high-earning immigrants with the right specialist skills to help us upgrade our economic performance. We also have, I think, an excellent innovation ecosystem. We have created a lot of innovative things in Guernsey over the past years: image rights, PCCs, ICCs, as well as perfecting, if not inventing, captive insurance. And within the financial services sector over the last year, there have been a lot of innovation initiatives to work out where we should aim for and what are the strengths on which we should endeavour to build. The Commission has been happy to be an integral part of those deliberations, making constructive suggestions based on our unique perspectives into the financial services industry. Thus, while I certainly can't speak for Guernsey business beyond the financial services industry, I think we have sufficient mass here in our main economic sector to innovate effectively. That is not to say that we cannot strive to improve, but the legal flexibility which we have here, legal flexibility which is considerably greater on almost all business matters than that enjoyed by any individual state of the European Union, gives us, if not a unique, certainly an unusual competitive advantage within the European context. It is one which we need to continue to work to develop. The Fiduciary and Innovations Director will say more about this tomorrow, whilst the General Counsel will, later on this afternoon, explain how we are using the Revision of Laws project to help us create the flexibility to cope with future changes in global financial services standards. Thought I'd have a drink. That's the easy bit of the speech done. I'm sure all of you didn't come here today expecting a series of talks focusing on how wonderful Guernsey is. After all, we aren't the tourist office or even Guernsey Finance. So I think we do need to look critically at areas where our collective approach is perhaps somewhat different to the most economically competitive and prosperous small economies. Unlike the Swiss, we don't have a plebiscite-based democracy, although the size of the electorate relative to the states means that we tend to be closer to our elected representatives than would be possible in most countries. Given that neither Singapore nor Hong Kong have anything approaching a plebiscite-based democracy, We should perhaps not be overly worried about this difference with Switzerland, as the Credit Suisse regression analysis shows the rule of law to be far more important than democratic credentials in driving economic growth. Moving forwards, we have a lot of outstanding teachers and some educational establishments which are outstanding at turning out highly skilled school leavers. Many firms are also good at providing continuing on-the-job training. But this is certainly an area where we might question whether the whole of Guernsey has a focus on academic attainment, of pushing every pupil to achieve the very best that he or she could achieve, in the same way that Singapore, Finland or Switzerland do. And then, of course, we have a notable gap in terms of an academically focused tertiary sector institution. Many people from Guernsey have found well-paid posts in the financial service sector over the past decades with secondary school levels of educational attainment, bringing their parents' work ethic from the horticultural industry with them. The world is, however, becoming much more complex and competitive. The definitions of what well-educated looks like are changing on a global basis, with the standards required for entry into many highly productive sectors increasingly requiring a first degree from a top-flight higher education institution, if not a postgraduate qualification. When I was in Ireland, I was stunned to see that you really didn't get an interview unless you had at least a first-class degree from a crack Irish university, as well as a distinction, your MSc or your MA. And that was, albeit it was in a time of recession, but it was, I think, a deep insight into just quite how competitive some other jurisdictions, which we might regard as competitors, are in terms of their output from their education institutions. There's also the issue that many firms are automating or outsourcing to lower-cost jurisdictions the work which was previously done by white-collar workers with modest educational backgrounds. We need to do all that we can to ensure that our children and their teachers understand that those jobs are simply not going to exist on Guernsey as we move further into the 21st century. They need to work really hard, making some difficult choices sometimes in terms of living off the island to go through higher education and return with the skills which allow them to compete with those who have gone through the English and the Irish educational systems, which are both increasingly prizing and producing academic excellence, which forms such a helpful foundation, not so much for its own sake, but such a helpful foundation for young people, because they'll be required to cope with a huge amount of change in their working lives, given the rate of evolution of technology and job roles. There is a further angle to this, which is that if you wish to maintain a sense of shared purpose on this island, which I for myself think is so important for us, and the balanced approach to immigration, which Credit Suisse suggests is helpful for economic success in small countries, we surely want to ensure that our children and our grandchildren are equipped to work effectively alongside the highly skilled, high-earning immigrants we allow to enter Guernsey. We want to be able to work as respected peers, able to partner with them from a position of educational equality. At the Commission, alongside some other employers, we now have a well-developed graduate programme